I'll hold it for now.
We're good? Okay. And we're back from commercial break. So where were we talking about? Oh, we're up to Baruch, right. So laptops, exactly. So graduated Baruch, just backstab, graduated Baruch, had a marketing company. My partner moved away, and then I met this other gentleman who was starting this laptop program, became a Toshiba certified technician, so if anybody has a laptop, I might be able to mess with it a bit. And again, we started doing this business. Didn't know much about it, but again, I knew I could sell, and he was more the tech admin side. So, you know, in any business, if you can get business, you'll be okay. It's the lifeblood of anything. So I knew I could at least do that. And what was interesting about this particular company is we were working with one particular school on 178th Street, and they were a big client. So we had that to start. It was a good place to start. It was going well, and then he got into his own sort of legal troubles, and that was sort of, you know, again, one of these setbacks you don't expect, but, you know, we couldn't do business anymore, and haven't really heard from him since, but we just, you know, parted ways pretty quickly. I remember, just sort of a side note, we had hired a office receptionist admin. I think she had moved from the Midwest. Maybe she'd be in the city for a couple of months, you know, really nice. And very soon this happened, and we had to let her go. And I remember, you know, telling the story, and she was so upset. And it was just one of these, you know, here she had come to the city, she had got a job, and I think it's such a good reminder that, you know, being able to work, being able to have is such an important thing, right? And she took it so seriously, she was so upset, and you can imagine the setback, you know, especially being in New York. And that's not an easy thing, I think, in New York to make your way. You know, we go, this is a total tangent, but, you know, we have part of the cafe, there's sort of a transient workflow, right? So it's writers and artists and people sort of on their way to someplace else. There's a few who want to manage cafes and be in the coffee business, but a lot of them are on their way to someplace else. And it's not easy, you know. They break up, they lose their apartment, and I see it all, they just leave, right? And so it's no small thing to try to make your way in the city. And that in and of itself, and as being in, you know, 27,000 students in BMCC is such an amazing experience. And so, you know, it's something we can all sort of not take for granted, just the people we meet and things we come across. And so I think that's important to mention. So we went our own separate ways, and I always had a feeling that I should go back to school, and I was always thought about law school, but I honestly put it off because I was sort of being lazy, and, you know, if maybe one of these businesses took off, I wouldn't need it, that kind of thing. And this happened. I said, okay, well, maybe now that's the time. And so I applied to law school, got into law school. And that was really the first time that I think I really enjoyed school. I think I was sort of edging to get out of, you know, to get out of school with this idea of let me just go to get to work and do something. And BMCC, you know, was an eye-opening experience. And I think in Baruch, you know, I started to sort of enjoy the study a little more. As you get into your higher level studies, you form a group of people and you meet people who are also interested in what you're doing. So, you know, it's a different caliber of student, if you will, right? As you get to the higher grades and you get more into your concentrations. And then when I went to law school, it was the first time I really enjoyed just the study and the camaraderie and being in school. And I found it just, again, eye-opening, immensely practical. I didn't know what I was going to do with it, but I enjoyed the study. I thought it was one of those just sort of horizon-expanding experiences. So you know what you're going to do with it, but you know it's been beneficial in some way. And I always had an interest in public service, you know, and I think that's, you know, ties into what I'm doing now. It was always important to me that whatever I ended up doing meant something, right? To me personally, hopefully contribute in some way to the community around me. And I think discovering what that means to you is a big part of it. You know, we were talking about social businesses before. You know, you could do everything from save the whales to save the trees to orphans. There's a million things you could do, right? The point is to find the thing that's important to you in that. And you don't have to solve all the problems. You just have to find a problem you care about and and solve it. So I'd been involved in political campaigns. I ran a summer internship that elects the city council speaker. So I'd always had this sort of public interest, I guess public interest. And I got a job at the DA's office. So I left law school. I became a prosecutor in Brooklyn for about 4 years, doing misdemeanors, then in grand jury, and then a couple of years in doing felonies. Have done a bunch of trials, loved it, loved being on trial, loved that kind of work. Everywhere you go, you meet something you don't like, right? And there was certainly a lot of sort of red tape, and you're there to pursue justice, and there's a lot of things sort of going the other way, and so you come up against that. And one of the questions is, what do you do, right? But I felt I needed to make a move. I sort of get a little antsy, and also there was no real sort of upside in a way. I had a family, 2 kids. What's the next step for it? So I just started to look around and see what I could do. And I practiced on my own for about a year. And then I had this opportunity to open a coffee shop. So my family had been in coffee back in the 70s. And that was just sort of, giving coffee to offices. And they had a place down on West Broadway, which turned into the Cupping Room Cafe. I don't know if you ever passed it on West Broadway and Broome Street. You grew up sleeping on the coffee bags there. It was like a warehouse, and then they served a muffin, and then it became a restaurant, and that kind of thing. And coffee was going through this really interesting rebirth of really good premium coffee, but also people really interested in where the coffee is coming from. Who are the people growing it? Are they getting paid fair wages? So it was a really interesting combination of business, creativity, social justice, economics, and I just thought, man, it'd be great, sort of something I'd like to get into. We had been family friends randomly with the actor Hugh Jackman for a while, and he had just come back from Ethiopia working with a group that he had been supporting, and we decided to, we mentioned to him we were going to open a coffee shop. He said, well, I'm looking to do something else with this journey I've taken. I went to Ethiopia, I worked with this coffee farmer, I made him a promise I would help. He got to speak at the UN as they all get to speak. And, but we all knew that there was some link between not just sort of raising awareness, but getting your hands dirty and getting into business and producing and working with farmers and getting into trade. And so we started Laughing Man Coffee, and we started the Laughing Man Foundation. And about 75% of the company goes to our foundation to support communities like Ducali and the kind of work that's going on there, not to give them aid so much, but to support their ability to trade so they could do business and have sustainable communities before the crisis hits, that kind of thing. Another thing we do, which is really important to us, is we're taking this film we have and we're experimenting. We're going into high schools, we're going into colleges and showing this documentary we have about Hugh's journey and the birth of Laughing Man, and sparking a conversation about sustainable agriculture, social entrepreneurship, women's health issues in the third world, all these things, because education in the end is sort of the silver bullet. And is why, again, I love participating in something like this, because without bigger, grander ideas, then we stay sort of boxed into what we think we know. So that's sort of the journey in a nutshell, and that's where I'm at now. Who knows what happens next? I'd like to eventually start doing more with the foundation, but they're still running the business, and so that's sort of the practicalities of just the world, which is part of the joy and part of the fun. But there were two things that struck me when I was looking at the journey, which is a great name for it, right? And it is a journey, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint, all these things people talk about. But 2 things struck me. One is, if I go back to this idea of this kid who sort of didn't like authority, didn't like being told what to do, wanted to get out there and sort of do it all on his own, it's a bad idea, right? It's an ignorant idea, right? You don't know everything, and you don't have to know everything. Nothing has ever happened great in the world. Nobody has ever accomplished anything in the world without a teacher. It just never happened. That teacher could be a person. It could be a book where they come across an idea. It could be a family member, but nobody's ever achieved anything on their own. It just doesn't happen that way, right? And we talk about sort of the American dream and things like this and pulling your bootstraps up, and all that is true, but it always takes teamwork, right? Somebody giving you a break and giving, you go to the interview and, maybe you know somebody so you get the job, but you still gotta prove your worth once you're there. So the first thing that struck me is, this is the time to go out, to fail, to succeed, to learn, but never stop learning. And I think as soon as we think, and especially now when the truth is, we're going to be testing ourselves. We're going to come into businesses and companies and ventures with people who just have more experience and more knowledge. And I think now if you can cultivate the attitude of always learning, of looking for mentors, of sort of a little bit of humility, right? Because too often I see people, I want to be entrepreneurs and, a little bit of not really understanding what that means, right? But you look at anybody great who you admire, they never stop learning, right? They never stop reading. They're always realizing they're standing on the shoulders of giants and stuff. And then comes our turn to be that for other people. And so that's the one thing that just strikes me off the bat is find teachers. It's okay not to know what you do know, understand what you don't know, but just never stop learning in that way. The second thing, and I've been, looking at this myself, and it's so interesting that you mentioned again, discovering who you are and what you're about. We talk about what does it mean to succeed, right? And I think you have to define that. What does that mean for you? Success doesn't mean looking at the other person and saying, what do they have, right? And comparing your level to everybody else. I think there's a natural level of competition. You look down, you want to be ambitious, but you have to go. And I don't think you have to know the answer now. I think it cultivates over years. Listen, my definition of success 20 years ago is different than my definition of success when I have a family, right? I want to make sure they're cared for, that they got insurance, that they're going to school, that kind of thing. But after that, right, once you sort of fulfilled these very obvious hierarchy of needs, right, the truth is then who are you battling against, right? And I think, especially as an entrepreneur, and so that's sort of the framework I'm looking at it, but it applies across the board, a big part of being successful is finding balance and well-being. And that doesn't mean not working hard. I think it means working very hard and being into what you're doing and not wishing you were someplace else. And it may not be the right job for you, and so maybe you got to find something else. But while you're there, really being there. And not holding a grudge about being there, or why me, all this thing. But knowing that the balance comes from being very clear on what you deem is important, right? And I think you're seeing more and more of that in the workplace now, whether you call it mindfulness or whatever, but I think you'll start seeing more people turning back to that kind of satisfaction. The job is part of your life and not your whole life, right? Anyway, so those are two things that I'm actually thinking about right now, so I find it very poignant to talk to you about it. And I don't know if they're things you have answers for, but they're things you keep in your mind as you're working forward. And I think they're things you evolve into. Anyway, that's sort of the story and what I thought was important to say. And again, workshops like this where you really get to talk about these issues that you're not gonna. There's no course in it really. I was telling one in law school, they had a course that was just like this, sort of practically, what do I do now? When I leave this building, where do I go, right? When you leave law school, you don't know where to go to file anything, right? It's sort of bizarre, right? So the practice of all the sort of intangibles, and the interview skills, how do you present yourself? But a big part of that is, again, knowing who you are and what you want to do. And I think that's sort of a life's journey, but the earlier you start thinking about it, I think the earlier it begins to benefit you, and people begin to see that. One story, and then I'll stop talking so much, but one story that I always love is, I used to go on interviews all the time, even if I didn't want the job, because it was just good experience, right? And I always got the job, right? Even if I didn't want it, I always got the job. And the reason I think I always got the job is because what happens if you went into an interview where you didn't really care if you got it or not? Well, what do you think would happen? Yeah, because, right, there's nothing riding on it, right? You know you don't need it. You've already, right? So you can just be yourself. You talk honestly, you're bright, you can joke, you're relaxed, right? All these things that we want to do in the workplace all the time, but other pressures come in, right? The workplace politics and all this. So, it just proves the point. The more we can find a way to be ourselves in all situations, the more we will succeed. You'll find benefit in your job. You'll find benefit in your life. People will look at you and say, man, they're